Hey, and welcome to today's podcast. In this episode, you're going to learn how to think faster and sound smarter on the spot. We have with us today Peter, Jessica, myself, Chaz. We'll go ahead and dive in here. First, let's define what these concepts are. Peter, take it away.
So speaking faster means you respond quickly. So if somebody asks you a question in a meeting or they put you on the spot or they challenge your idea, can you respond back quickly enough and not freeze? That's the quick part. The smart is if you respond fast, you don't want to sound dumb or you don't want to say stupid things or sometimes slip and say something racist or so you have to sound smart, which means you have to invest the time to develop your thoughts. Either do it uh, with practice so you can think on the spot, or my preferred method is to pre-think your thoughts. So spend time before the meeting, spend time before even you get that job to develop your ideas, your thinking, and flesh them out, test them against relatives. For example, for me, my wife is the biggest test. I have an idea, I think it's brilliant. Before I share it with the team, I just go and share it with my wife. And if she says it's stupid, it's definitely stupid. Back to the board, and if she likes it, I go, okay, great. Now I can probably, it's in a good shape where I can share it with others.
So don't just go into every situation completely shooting from the hip, but instead, as you go into a meeting or as you go into an interview or as you go into these different situations where it's not a traditional presentation, but you're going to have to think on the spot. So just think through some things. I like that. And
Rethink. Yeah. I like the word shooting from the hip. That's something we get all the time from our clients, especially sales organizations where they come and complain to us. Either sales professionals don't speak a lot or they just shoot from the hip. And either way, it's not good. And it takes what we're talking about today to develop smarter, faster thoughts.
exactly. And something else that I'll hear when speaking with clients as well is that they will feel long-winded when speaking up in the moment. So they may feel long-winded because they're literally thinking through their thoughts out loud. So they're not very clear, they're not very concise. So taking a second to pre-think their ideas, that way when they get to a situation like that, they can pull this out. So that's great.
Absolutely.
And Jessica, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think taking the time to intentionally build a stockpile of stories and different frameworks and maybe different seeds for to use in those environments will make a huge difference in how fluid you're speaking. And like you said, Chaz, it'll make you much more concise. Having to think through it right there on the spot will kind of muddy the waters a little bit. But yeah, building that stockpile, I think, is a fantastic idea.
Mm-hmm. And what have you seen work well for you in the past or other clients you've worked with for different situations?
I spent years doing different trainings. I've certified over 300 people in different food safety techniques. In that time, I built my own little stockpile, if you will, of different stories to use inside of training. I very early on understood the power of these stories. In recent years, I actually had a student come to me and tell me that his boss relayed some of those stories that I had told during a training to his staff. And so I really took that to heart and started intentionally building my stockpile of stories that I could use in these training sessions. I went as far as to have a little file where I would put pictures that would go along with these stories to really help drive home that visualization for training practices. So I myself have done this and still intentionally build my own stockpile to use in our public speaking trainings.
That's great. So have some ideas you want to pre-think, also have some stories or examples or analogies, some of the ways that individuals who are more technical or not even necessarily tech, but have more industry or domain knowledge, and they are explaining it to people who do not understand what they're talking about. a lot of times people will come to us and say, I don't know how to explain my ideas to others. Or so building some analogies for sticking points that they know are there is a great way to explain what they're doing. So a very deep technical concept, having that analogy and turning it over. So Peter.
Yeah, awesome. I just want to comment on what Jessica said, a stockpile. Imagine it's a
Mhm.
stockpile. And I've heard different trainers refer to it as different things. For years, I've called it assets. I'm building my assets, like in real estate assets that I can use, reuse over time. I've heard trainers talk about it, say it's a reservoir. I've heard trainers say it's their cash reserves. So whatever you call it, it's something that you save up over the years and you get to use on the spot. So you sound smart.
Mm. And what are some mistakes that people make when they're trying to build these reserves in these assets?
I think one of the, oh, I'm sorry, Peter, go ahead.
I would say the first mistake is not building the reservoirs.
Not really.
Like I like a lot of our clients, they come to us and they've worked in the industry for 20 years, and you ask them to explain a simple concept and they go, I have to think about that. Wow, you should have. Now I don't want to use you should have, because maybe they didn't know. They just relied on intuition, on the spot kind of processing to do it. Now we encourage them to start building their reservoir, which is re-examine their knowledge, categorize it, put it, like, for example, seeds are like thoughts, messages, opinions that you want to share with other people. Stories is like what Jessica shared. Analogies that you typically use to translate your knowledge to somebody else. And sometimes we help them do frameworks, because when you get to a leadership position, you start to needing frameworks to explain the landscape of what you're doing. So for example, if you're a leader in AI, you need to explain the landscape of AI. If you are a leader in public speaking training, then you need to explain the landscape using a framework to explain it. And that these are things I would say the first thing you need to do is to start looking at your knowledge base and categorize it and start building the asset base or the stockpile.
The stockpile, asset base. That's great, Peter. And Jessica, what were you going to say for some of the mistakes people make?
Well, to build on what Peter said, I think one of the mistakes you can make is in your stockpile having, when you're talking about one concept in particular, is only having maybe one or two that you can fall back on. So you want to make sure that those topics that you're bringing up, like in Peter's example in explaining AI, you want to have a couple of analogies in your stockpile, maybe a couple of stories in your stockpile. I know myself, having had a small stockpile at one time, told the same story several times and explained it the same way. And we've got different thinkers, right? We talk about these different thinkers, and we have to make sure that we have different stories in our stockpile and different frameworks and seeds so that we can hit all of those different types of thinkers. I've made that mistake having hung out with scientists for so many years in my previous career. We all thought the same, but we can all hit the ceiling if we're not really catering to those different types of thinkers. So having several different ways to explain that same topic is, I think, really key.
That's a great point, because then if you run into the scenario where you don't have anything prepared, you can at least pull from a few other concepts. So there is the situation that you may run into where you have not prepared anything. You have done all the pre-thinking, you built up all the assets you can, but you're asked a question or you're in a situation that you have never been in before. So that's not specifically what we're discussing here. To learn more about that, we have other videos. We have our impromptu bootcamp. There's a lot more. And the key concept with that is trusting yourself in the moment to respond. But if you've done a lot of this work, you've thought about these frameworks, you've thought about these seeds, you've thought about these stories, you at least know how to think about them going into that unknown situation. So changing it up here, Peter, you have mentioned frameworks. Let's discuss that a little bit more. So how can people start to use frameworks in these situations to lean on that?
Well, let's think, what is a framework? It's something you hang all the information you have on. I've heard Jessica before say a framework is like a recipe. So the assets are the ingredients, and then the framework is how you mix it together. That's one way to look at it. Another way, it's to think about it like a Christmas tree. Framework is a Christmas tree, and the assets are the ornaments you add to the Christmas tree. It's something solid that you can share with other people to help them understand the whole system of your knowledge, not just one little part. And I shared a story before. I first learned about frameworks from Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders. That's the first framework I ever encountered. And that's the first time I've heard the word framework used in a training setting. And ever since, I've been hooked. I've been cranking out framework after framework for myself and clients.
That's great. So have some frameworks, have your own Christmas trees and recipes. So Jessica, using the recipe, I know you like that. So what are your thoughts on frameworks?
Well, Chaz, I know I've been in those situations like you talked about, where somebody will ask you a question and you're a little unsure. Having that framework there, I had a past participant in a storytelling boot camp a couple of weeks ago that she said the framework for her really worked well because she felt like she only needed to have one piece and then the framework built in the rest of it. So having that cache pile of those one pieces will help you build the rest of it there. So even in a situation where you're asked a question that you're a little unsure, going back to that cache that we were talking about earlier, you can pull out one little piece. If you want to think about it as a recipe, you can pull out your self-rising flour and then you can build on it from there. So having those couple little pieces, ingredients, if you will make things a lot easier when you're in that situation and you're a little unsure what the answer is, because we're all going to be there time and time again.
That's right. Yeah.
Just to add on what Jessica said. So for example, a framework, one of the frameworks we teach is called a SEED framework: statement, evidence, emotion, demo. So anytime you want to share an idea, you just think of the framework. I need to have a statement, which is an opinion or a fact. I need to have evidence to support it. I need to have a story to make it emotionally engaging. And sometimes if it's a technical presentation, I might need a demo. And done. Now that framework helps you organize your thoughts every single time.
Perfect. Organize your thoughts every time. So wrapping up here, this is great. Just to recap, to think faster and to sound smarter on the spot, you have to really do three main things here. One, really have to build those assets. Pre-think what may come up in those situations. Two, build those stories, those examples of what may come up. So you're thinking through more of the reasoning, getting your opinion, then you're building the stories or examples. And then finally, you are learning to use frameworks to really lean on for the more uncertain situations. Well, thank you for joining us today. Take one of these concepts, run with it, and start to implement it. And over time, you'll find yourself to be a lot better on the spot. See you next time.